Those little or should I say
We'll get going here. First, my name is Keith, for those of you that haven't already heard that, and W5IU, and I live in the southwest side of Fort Worth, and in what is known as a area coordinator for AMSAT. That's somebody that goes around to hamfests and club meetings and stuff like that, talks about satellites and gives demos and what have you. I also am what's known as a ARIS, Amateur Radio on the International Space Station, technical mentor. And we go around to schools all over the world, and sometimes in person, but more often by telephone and email, and help the local hams and the school teachers and all get all set up for school contacts with the space station, where the kids get to talk to the astronauts. And we'll talk more about that in just a little bit as we get into the presentation. I'm going to also, while I'm thinking about it, I got more of these than I probably need, but y'all can pass these around and we'll talk about them. That's the master. Pass those around and we'll talk about them in a little bit. Those are handouts to keep. We're going to start out, just to give you a quick overview, we're going to talk about the history a little bit of amateur satellites, what we do with them, both educational wise and just hams talking through them, and what's up there right now and what's coming up in the future. So that's kind of the outline of what we're going to do. To start off with, satellite history, very briefly. Sputnik 1 was launched in 1957. The first Oscar 1, our amateur satellite, was launched in 12th of December in 1961, only 4 years later. So we've been up there a long time. ARISAT was a big one we launched several years ago out of the space station. It was one of our more recent ones in 2011. Actually, there's been approximately 100 major amateur radio satellites launched by all people. That's us and the Russians and the Japanese and the Germans and the Indians and people all over the world, even the Chinese. So we've only, over those years, we've only launched 3 of them in what we call a high Earth orbit, or HEO orbit. And unfortunately, they're all 3 gone. Those are the ones we lust after and would love to have again if we can ever find anybody with some deep pockets with a lot of money to get. That's our problem, is getting a paid launch for them. Anyway, many more CubeSats have been launched. That's the buzzword these days. A CubeSat, by definition, is 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 inches and weighs no more than a kilogram, 2.2 pounds. And there's been a whole bunch of those built and launched by schools and universities. We'll talk quite a bit about Fun Cube thing that the Brits put up, and we'll work people through it out in the parking lot after this is over, if you stick around long enough. And Fox 1 is the first one of those that AMSAT is actually going to put up. But there's many more of those. They don't really count in the 100. There's probably been over 100 CubeSats put up in the last few years. Most of them don't have transponders. Most of them are just telemetry beacons, and the school puts up an experiment they want to do, and they telemeter the data down, and when it's over, it's over. Burns up and re-enters. Okay, start off with, Sputnik 1 launched 4th of October 57, and I'm going to use a little demonstration we did on the 50th anniversary of that to kind of illustrate some of what it did. First off, there's a picture of Sputnik 1. A lot of you guys got enough gray hair to remember that, so that's good. This is some pictures of it taken, opened, exploded. You might say exploded view, that's a bad word when satellites exploded. But anyway, it's opened up. That's one of the prototypes. And this is taken in the Energia Museum in Moscow a few years ago on a tour I took up there. I won't dwell on this because we got quite a bit to go over, but this is details of its design. It was made out of aluminum, had 2 radio transmitters, 20.005 and 40.002. I listened for it on 20.005, and not understanding much about orbital mechanics at the time, I didn't listen long enough, so I never did hear it. But a lot of people did. Anyway, it did a lot of things. It launched by an R-7 rocket and burned up on re-entry in January the 4th, 1958, just a few months later. Again, some details of it. Its orbit was a 65.1 degree inclination orbit, went around the Earth every 96 minutes, and it had an apogee or high point of 583 miles and a perigee or low point of 134. And that low perigee is what caused the orbit to collapse and for it to burn up and re-enter. That was too low a perigee to last very long. Okay, this is a picture of the New York Times. Soviet fires Earth satellite into space, circling the globe at 18,000 miles an hour. And everybody got kind of worried about that back in those days, if you remember some of that. Picture of Sputnik in the fall of 57, as they put finishing touches on it. And think back on that. What did it mean to you? Where were you? Where did you first hear of it? Did you see it? Did you hear the radio signals? And what did it mean to the world? Well, to the world, everybody thought, my goodness, the Russians are gonna attack and kill us all. And I was in, let's see, 57, I was in junior college at the time. I've been a ham since 53, but I was in junior college by then. And I didn't hear it, but like I say, I listened for it. On its birthday, 50th birthday, we decided to try something a little different. AMSAT celebrated this event by doing special activities on AMSAT Oscar 51, which was available at that time, one of our satellites. It's since not re-entered, but its batteries went dead and it's not with us anymore. But what we did back in October of that year, we used it in a special mode. We used an L-band or 1200 megahertz uplink and a 435 meg downlink out of it. And we had 3 stations stationed across the U.S. in appropriate places, and they uplinked an audio message, part of which was an actual recording of the real Sputnik 1, and then just some greeting messages and all up to the bird. And on one pass over the east, a pass over the middle of the country, a pass over the west, and people were able then to listen to it and apply for QSL cards and all that kind of stuff. And anyway, we'll get into a little more of that in a minute. I worked with a group at a church here over in Fort Worth, Hemp Hill Presbyterian at the time, and we had a kids connection, we called it, after school program, and we got those kids interested in it. And we actually had them go out and listen, watch a satellite pass, visual pass of the space station, and then we listened during the class to this satellite and special satellite. Actually, I listened to it that evening and recorded it on the radio, and we played it back to the class because they weren't available then. But anyway, nice QSL. That group honored, they got that QSL, and boy, they're just beside themselves, happy about it. Anyway, here's the pass we used was at 829 local that evening, recorded it, and it was a pretty good pass. Now, here's the audio that was sent up to the satellite and back down. There's the Sputnik.
Congratulations on the 50th anniversary of the launch of the second flight.
That's Frank Bauer's daughter, KA3HDO's daughter.
Is the signal transmitting data or is it just warbling?
It's warbling a little bit. I was using that 2-meter Yagi, standing in the parking lot listening to it on an FM radio. Anyway, that was the celebration we did, and we also had a sighting opportunity that night where we took the kids and had them go at home, go outdoors and watch an International Space Station pass come over. And if you've never done that, that's a fun thing to do. It's pretty easy to do, and give you, this is a picture of the pass that they watched that night, the ground track for that pass. It went practically right over Fort Worth with peak elevation of 76 degrees. And that's a pretty bright object if you haven't looked at it before. Go out there when it's predicted, either, anywhere from sunset to an hour to 2 hours after sunset, or an hour to 2 hours before sunup to sunup, and on appropriate days, and you can see it very well. Now here's the group that we got graduated, you might say, at the church, the Kids Connection, and they built little models of Sputnik out of.
Is that the actual size of this?
Actually, those are about quarter scale.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, those are made out of styrofoam and dowel pins. But they had a ball doing that. And we used that same concept for another project I'll show you here in a minute. Anyway, that was good. While we were talking about Sputnik in education, a few years before that, I worked with a group at Riverside Applied Learning Center in Fort Worth, which is a fancy name for a special kind of K through 5 elementary school. And I worked with a first grade school teacher that I'll never forget, Dr. Debbie Coonrod. And we did a space day for one thing, and then that led to this communications club activity that went on for the next couple of years after that, every Friday afternoon. And we would do various things. One of our graduation exercises one year, we decided we would take the temperature of a satellite. We'll get into that here in a minute. You may wonder how in the world are we going to do that. I'll show you. First off, these are the members of the club. These are all K through about 3rd grade level kids. And one I want to point out in particular is Armando Villarreal. I'll say a few more words about Armando here in a minute. First off, the satellite we used was Sputnik 41, which is a small model of Sputnik that was launched on a spacewalk out of the Mir space station in November of '98. And the instructions that they gave the astronauts when they took it outdoors is to launch it. They said, throw it gently towards the moon. And you get out of the space station and you just throw it gently towards the moon. They anticipated it'd last about 30 days. At the time we did this, it was still alive and well. And it was built by French and Russian students. And we used it, people all over the world used it for things. Sputnik 41 temperature. See today's presentation for actual measurement. It was approximately 75 degrees F in that satellite. Room temperature environment, but you'd have to hold your breath a long time if you were up there. A few details about it. It was an 8-inch diameter sphere, 9 pounds, 4 antennas, 145, 815, ran 200 milliwatts, and it just had batteries. It had no solar panels. So when the battery is depleted, it was dead. Now,
How
it
long
had
did it
messed.
last?
What?
How long did those batteries last?
It was predicted to last about 30 days, but I think it came closer to 45 or so before it went dead. Anyway, here's some typical messages. First, the beep, beep, beep simulated the first Sputnik. Kind of a rough simulation, but that was cammed on it and it did that. And then it transmitted a tone, and the frequency of that tone was proportional to the temperature of the satellite. That's how we got the temperature. We had a calibration chart then of tone frequency versus temperature on the ground that they had recorded when they built it. So what we did, we went outdoors with a radio and a recorder, and we recorded the passes and went over and got the tone as a part of that. And then I'll show you what we did with the tone in a minute, in front of the whole school. It had, in the tone, of course, was right over here. Where'd my, oh, there it is. That's the tone it was transmitting that day.
Is that in Russian or French?
I think that's international.
Oh, okay.
We'll try some of these others. It also transmitted some voice messages.
Международная космическая школьная программа «Спутник».
And what does that sound like?
Well, doesn't tone, isn't there like a Doppler shift or something when there's something moving?
Yeah, but we'll talk about that in a minute too. This was on an FM transmission, and you don't hear that because it's embedded in it. Now, that was another Russian. Now here's a,
Programme spatiale internationale de satellite éducatif.
you speak French. It had two Russian, two French, and two English.
1998, c'était l'année internationale de l'air et de l'espace.
Now, I'll say before we hit the English ones, I don't think this is a native English speaker.
1998 was the International Year of
Yeah, Russian.
International Space School Sputnik Program.
Like I say, I don't think he was a native English speaker.
Certainly wasn't from Texas.
Now, what we did, we took a receiver, ran it into an audio recorder, and then ran that to the horizontal plates on an oscilloscope. Then we took an audio frequency generator that had a counter tied to it and ran that onto the vertical plates. And then we adjusted the audio frequency for a circle or a Lissajous pattern of a circle on the scope and read the frequency counter, and that's how we measured the frequency. We knew that when you got a circle on the scope, the audio generator and the recording were a match, and you could read the temperature then, or read the frequency and go on the chart and get the temperature. Well, this all happens fairly quick, and we wanted this was done in a gymnasium in front of the whole class, the whole school actually, and we had a globe sitting out in the middle of the floor as an earth, and we had a kid with one of those Sputnik models walking around the globe. We had another kid over here with a radio and one of those antennas pointing at the satellite, and he had a recorder and all. And then we played that back. But the key thing was we had to have somebody, a kid. I could do it pretty easy, but we had to find a kid that could adjust the frequency generator knob quick enough and while watching the scope. And that's not going to be a perfect circle. He needed to get close to a circle out of it. So he had to be able to recognize that and measure the frequency. And we tried all the kids we could find, and we finally found Armando Villarreal. He's a little third grade Hispanic boy, and boy, he could do that just like that, no sweat. He was the only one that had the coordination to really do that though. And we got him to do it, and he adjusted it. He'd call out the frequency, and we'd go from there. And what we did from there was, here was our table of points, frequency in hertz versus Celsius and Fahrenheit. Actually, they sent it to Celsius, and we had to convert it to Fahrenheit. But anyway, and there's the calibration chart. So if we got a 1200 hertz tone, you go over there and that's, what, about 68 degrees, something like that, on that chart. Well, I didn't think I could get a kid that understood enough. We had a transparency in a view graph machine. Didn't think I could get a kid that could plot that up on the chart, you know, very reliably. So I was going to do that myself. During practice, I did that a couple of times, and as soon as I did it a couple of times, Armando says, "Let me do that, let me do that." So he did the whole thing. We got him to twist the knob, measure the frequency, lay the lines on the chart, and read the frequency. And he was
a future scientist.
I'll bet you that little boy is in science somewhere today. I
Future
guarantee.
scientist,
I'd like to know where he is, but he was a sharp little boy, third grader at the time. Anyway, that's taking the temperature of a satellite in front of a whole bunch of kids. They all really got a bang out of that. The parents did too.
Is that information useful for anything, the temperature and stuff?
Well, it confirmed what they thought when they built the satellite.
Oh, okay.
You know, there's things you do to a satellite to make the temperature come out right. Coatings you put on it and stuff like that, and so on. Okay, Oscar 1. It was launched December the 12th, 1961, and this is a clipping out of my hometown newspaper on December the 13th, 1961. Vandenberg Air Force Base, Oscar, a 10-pound radio robot, is orbiting the world, beeping high, remember, did-it-did-it-did-it-did-it-did-it, to radio hams from Birdland, Antarctica to Kodiak, Alaska. And Oscar is short for orbiting satellite carrying amateur radio. And it goes on to describe all of that. But that's what we did. Now, 50 years after that one, we had a celebration of it at an AMSAT meeting out in San Jose, California. And a guy from the ARRL had the existing prototype of that bird that's still alive and works with him, and demonstrated it there. You see pictures of it here and over in that corner. And this fellow with his wife is Lance Jenner. He was one of the hams that helped build it and helped launch it, arrange for the launch and launch it, and actually gave us a talk at that meeting, a very informative talk. But now this is a recording made by W0SL, Roy Welsh, in Dallas during that time. Hear that did-it-did-it-did-it? Now there was another thing that was interesting about that did-it-did-it-did-it. You could tell the temperature of this satellite too, very crudely, but if that went did-it-did-it-did-it real fast, it was high temperature. If it went did-did-did-did-did, it was cold. So that was nominal temperature. The code speed was proportional to the temperature. So there's been a lot of things done with satellites over the years. AeroSat, I threw that up just as a contrast in what things can do. This is one we built and launched out of the space station in 2011. And I'll show you, well, you see it had solar panels on all surfaces, all but this one. Well, it had half of the one on the top, and it had a control panel and antennas. Anyway, being as how it came out of the space station, it didn't last very long either. It lasted about 6 months and re-entered. But it had a really neat set of signals. It had an FM, 2-meter FM downlink, and in that downlink, well, there was an FM signal. There was a software-defined transponder. You could have a pass band to clear across the area and several different signals under software control through that pass band. It had an FM signal that had audio on it sometimes. It had slow scan TV on it. It had various things. It had in this area right here, there was a linear transponder, sideband CW transponder. This was a BPSK telemetry beacon and a CW beacon on the side, all going all the time. But it was up there. And there's not one of the better ones, but an example of the SoScan TV out of it. This is just a plot of total telemetry frames that were downloaded out of it, total telemetry frames received, and versus the date. And people all over the world were listening for it, posting it to a common server and archiving the data. And here's, let's see, number of ground stations on the vertical versus date. And you notice there's over 70 ground stations that were contributing satellite telemetry to the internet server. Here's a typical, well, this is actually the number of the stations working at U.S. had 87, Japan had 19, and so on. And these are the telemetry frames, and you see that U.S. had 45,000, and Japan had 25,000, and others throughout the world. But the reason us and the Japs were so much ahead of everybody else is we had several stations that were totally automated that could sit there and capture the data every time it came over and automatically send it in. So anyway, that's kind of what was happening. You could go, had it all set up so you could go on your iPhone and call this up and look at the telemetry in near real time out of your cell phone. And this is just some of the things that it accomplished. It helped us train a new generation of satellite builders, provided a good platform for student experiments, and put us through all of the wickets that it takes to go through a NASA payload safety review. We used all kinds of new ideas like Velcro to stick the solar panels to the space frame. Anyway, a new BPSK data protocol, and used a lot of common off-the-shelf parts for SDX and main transponder systems. Nothing exotic in there. It had 40 kilohertz wide transponder. By the way, that SDX transponder is very, very similar to what is active on FunCube today. When we listen to FunCube later, it was developed by the same people. The PowerPoint trackers was developed in here, and it's used in the later versions of some of the CubeSats. The International Data Collection Network, the Brits have set up what they call dashboard, and you download telemetry, kids do all over the world, download it into the dashboard automatically and share the data. And anyway, you see a lot of the things it pioneered. A little more kind of a wrap up of those. AO51 was a real good one. We used it for that 50-year demonstration. It's now a silent key. We plan to replace it with another. It was basically an FM satellite. We're going to replace it with another FM satellite, Fox 1. High Earth orbit satellites. We all that were around when they were up really missed those because they went way out, almost at or above geosynchronous altitude. So they were in view 8 to 10 hours a day at a time, and half of the world at a time. So you could work all over the world, just like 20 meters, except you didn't have a dead zone. You could talk to your next door neighbor and somebody in Timbuktu at the same time, if you were both in the footprint. AO10 was launched in 83, AO13 in about 86 or 7, and AO40 about 2001 or so. Forget the exact dates, but we have one of those sitting on the shelf in Germany right now, waiting for an affordable launch. An affordable launch these days is in the order of 4 or 5 megabucks to get on a satellite, on a vehicle that will take you to geosynchronous transfer orbit. We got those on experimental vehicles for little or no cost, but we haven't. They quit experimenting. They go for paid launches nowadays. AO27 was a real good one we had that hasn't been officially declared dead, but hadn't been heard from in over a year, so I suspect its batteries have finally gone, and Fox 1 will be its replacement. as well. Give you an idea of satellite orbits. Those high Earth orbit ones are the big circle that goes way out like that. They had a very high apogee and a very low perigee as they did an ellipse around the Earth. Most of our satellites today are in LEO orbit, which are these low Earth orbits. Your GPS birds are all out here in a circular orbit at 20,000 kilometers. Ours are mostly polar, but they're not all polar. And that gives you some idea. The geosynchronous satellites that you use for TV relay and all, they're in a very unique orbit. That orbit being, it's got to be in the plane of the equator, and it's got to be at the magic altitude of like 22,500 miles, so that as the Earth turns, the satellite moves and it stays in sync. So it's not really stationary, but it stays over the same point on the Earth all the time because they're synced up. It's been recently announced that one of the Middle Eastern countries has, forget which one now, but they've given, I believe it was the Germans, have given them space for a transponder on a geosync communications bird here in the next couple of years. Unfortunately, the one they've got the space in is too far east for us. We won't be able to use it, but it'll be good all over Europe and Africa and some of the Middle East. Hopefully we'll find somebody. We've thought about that over here, but we haven't found anybody to donate space yet. So there again, it's dollars. Presently, we have 4 linear transponder birds. That's birds that work sideband and CW. The one we worked this morning first was Pugh Oscar 29, FO29. That's a Japanese satellite. It's been up there quite a while. AO7 is AMSAT Oscar 7. That was launched out of Vandenberg Air Force Base in 1974. It died in 1981, and then in 2001, a guy was listening around the band, and that sounds familiar. G3IOR over in England. He says, I don't know what that is, but he got to checking, and it was AO7's CW beacon had come back. So we got to checking, and sure enough, that bird was back active again, and it's still active today. AMSAT Oscar 7 launched in '74. Now, what you may ask is, how in the world did that happen? As far as we know, the batteries on it died in 1981, and they went short, pulled the terminal voltage down, and transponders wouldn't work anymore, and it was dead for all practical purposes. 2001, whether it's corrosion or what, we don't know for sure, but something happened in that battery chain, and it opened up. And when it opened up, the solar panels are still working, power regulator's still working, and now whenever it's in sunlight, which is nearly all the time, it's operational, and has been since 2001. So things do happen favorably every now and then. And VO52 is an Indian bird that is a little over 5 years old now, working fine. AO73 is the British FunCube-1, which is a CubeSat, but it's a very neat little CubeSat, and we're going to try and work through it after this is over, 11:30 or so. There's another one that really doesn't have a linear transponder on it, but it's going to have slow scan TV, it's going to have beacons, it's going to have a bunch of stuff. Sprout, and that's a Japanese satellite that was launched this morning, just today. And actually, before I came to the meeting, it has been heard. The launch was successful, and it has been heard, and everything's apparently working good. We've got one FM bird still left, and that's Saudi Oscar 50. It's a little microsat, bigger than a CubeSat, but it's active today. And but we're down to just one FM satellite. Now FM, The FM satellites in general are a little easier to work than the linears because of the FM capability. You have to correct for Doppler, but you don't have to stay right on it like you do with the linears. And you can get by without being full duplex. You can work them with a FM handy-talkie rather than a radio that does sideband and CW. And so they're a little easier. And we hope to get that back going again. Oh, there was something else I was going to mention. Yeah, in talking about, well, it'll come up in a minute, but there's another version of AO73, another version of FunCube supposed to launch on the 19th of June. So there's another one of them coming up very soon too. AO73 went up last October, I believe, and has been active ever since. The International Space Station has various things on board of it, and there's a full status of that. There was one on the 2013 version of the Dayton report on Dayton, but you go under the social networks on the AMSAT webpage and click on YouTube, and there's that kind of a report there. So we'll talk more about it in a minute. ARIS, amateur radio on the International Space Station. We have now set up over 900 school contacts around over the world for school kids to go talk to the astronauts, and we'll show you some of that in a minute. For school contacts, the downlink is always 145-800, so if you know there's one available and you're in the footprint, you can listen to it direct. A lot of those are also put out on Echolink, that you can listen to on Echolink. We did an HPRS digipeating on 145-825 a while ago out there in the parking lot. That's what we were doing, was listening to the space station on the little handheld radio and decoding the packets. Occasionally they run slow scan TV on it, but primarily that's the Russians do that. We don't generally do that, but the Russians like to do that on their radios in the Russian module. And we do the little Ericsson radios in the Columbus module. And very recently we've commissioned a new ham TV, digital ham TV transmitter on board the ISS. It hasn't been used in conjunction with the school contact, but later this year it will be prototyped and well, it'll be used in school contact. What we have to do is get ground station network of stations that are capable of receiving it, and then each of those will feed data to the internet, stream data to the internet, and you can piece it together and get video. That's all been checked out and working, but it hasn't been deployed in an actual contact yet. We have a new round of U.S. schools. Schools have to apply and win the right to do this, and we've got a new round of those in progress right now. We've had a little bit of a setback just recently, starting about the middle of May. There are no hams on board the space station at the moment for about 2 months. That's the first time that's happened since 2000 when the space station was active. But we're without any hams on board until the latter part of June, and we'll be back doing this again. We got another one of those coming up in November, December time frame this year. Purpose and objectives of ARIS: promote education of the youth in math, what they call STEM engineering, or STEM, math, science, technology, math, and engineering and mathematics, STEM. Anyway, I don't have it in the right order there. Secondary is expose students and others to amateur radio and benefits of ham radio. And we do it by working with educators all over the world and space agencies all over the world, NASA, and European Space Agency, ESA, JAXA in Japan, and Roscosmos in Russia, and so on. There's a picture of the ISS in its full-up capability right now. You can see, it all started with basically what's down here in the middle, and it just grew. So it took it nearly 10 years to get to full strength, but it's up there now. We do schools and other groups, organized schools during the school year, other groups in the off-season, such as scout groups, summer camps, hospitals, and others. And occasionally we get an astronaut that's interested in working hams in general. It's not too often that happens, but when they do, they have a ball. Old Doug Wheelock, when he went up there, the ink wasn't even dry on his ticket yet, and he had agreed to do school contacts, but nothing else. And he got up there and decided, you know, this is kind of fun. And he wound up working over 2,000 general contacts while he was up there.
Didn't he have a full
We
time?
called him the Contact King. Here's just a kind of montage. This is a Caroli Elementary School in West Monroe, Louisiana. I was the mentor for that contact. And I want to say a few words in that the father is AE5V. He did most of the negotiating. The boy beside him is his son, who was in Caroli Elementary at the time. The son had passed his technician test at the time, and actually his license came the day before this contact. And the father withheld the license for a day, but they had already briefed the boy on what's going to happen and all. And as you'll see here in just a minute, there's the Caroli Elementary kids all set up for that contact. The whole school was out there. The PTA had t-shirts made for everybody, and we had a real ball at that school. Here's Caroli in action. Notice the boy holding the microphone. That's the son. He made the contact that day and conducted it for all of the other kids. Here's the other kids watching. The lady in the lower right was somewhat of an angel to the group. She was the school principal. And as far as she was concerned, Eris could do no wrong. She was behind it every step of the way, which is a little unusual these days. And if there was something came up that she couldn't handle, her husband was on the school board and he would take care of it. So that gives you an idea what works sometimes. Here's another example. This is a little closer to home. This is Walnut Creek Elementary in Azle, Texas. And that's, oh, my mind's going blank. I'll think of her name in a minute, but she was a ham herself and a fourth grade school teacher. And she was the one we worked with to set it up. If you notice the guy sitting at the table there, that was me. But here's some more of that. Here we are putting antennas up on the roof of the school and running the contact. Kids sitting in the audience. And Walnut Hill. How many of you know Harold Reisner, K5SXK? That's him helping us put antennas on the roof. So. That was another one of them I worked with. Here's one of those groups, non-school groups. This is Girl Guides of Canada, that same year up in Canada. Here's a group up at Camp Cabot on Lake Texoma in Oklahoma. And that's the group that did it is the Aeronautical Center Amateur Radio Club out of Oak City. And Camp Cabot is a camp that they run every year for kids from all over Oklahoma that are very medically challenged. Cancer patients, you name it. They bring kids down there to that camp. We were able to pull that off. You see the crowd here and the people doing the contact. Even had the media there and so on. But that was an interesting contact. That fellow in the man and wife in yellow there, that's Joe Lynch in 6CL from, at that time, Tulsa. He's editor of the VHF column in CQ magazine. He's also editor of CQ VHF magazine. His wife Carol is W6CL, and she's blind, been blind nearly all her life, but is a very accomplished ham, musician, you name it. And they were down there for that contact. They, by the way, have now, Joe, his primary job is he's a Methodist preacher, and he's now left Tulsa and is in charge of a, I forget the exact title, but a religious branch at West Point in New York. So anyway, just throw that in for what it's worth. This is another group in a very depressed area in Gary, Indiana. And I just throw that on here, showing people putting things together. You see the neighborhood that's not too great, putting things on the school. They actually did a lot of good in just sprucing up the school for this contact. And it made a lasting impression on a whole bunch of kids that had almost given up in that depressed area of Chicago, or Gary, Indiana. ARIS does direct contacts where the space station is coming right over that area, and sometimes though we do what we call a telebridge contact, where the geometry doesn't work out for a station. Let's say you got a school in Fort Worth, and on a date that the space station's not coming over here during school hours. So we set up a contact through a station in Australia that does have the space station in view at that time, and telebridge or telephone connected into the school wherever it might be. We got one of those coming up once we get the astronauts back up there, get handed back up there in late June. I've just been working on it the last day or two to do two schools on one telebridge, and it'll be a school in Belgium and a school in Italy at the same time through whatever bridge station worked out during that period. We haven't got that settled yet. Here's that contact king. That's Doug Wheelock floating around up there making those 2,000 contacts. Okay, now this is another ARIS guy. He's actually been up there twice, but Chris Hatfield, and this was taken at his last school contact on his last mission, and that was taken at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Headquarters in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, Canada. Now that's way, way up there in the northwestern part of Canada. Chris made contacts with schools all over Canada during that mission, at least one in every province of Canada. And they all signed that poster that's in the middle, and all the kids that made all the contacts signed that poster, and they made a presentation to him after he came down. Now, as a little contrast, on his earlier mission, the one he was on before, he made this recording. Now, kids come up with questions to ask him. The very most common question is, how do you go to the bathroom in space? Well, here's Chris's answer. This is always I'll make it happen here. Come on.
When you go to the bathroom on Earth, you're relying on gravity pretty heavily. Imagine if you were halfway done and somebody shut off gravity, it would be a mess. And you'd float off the toilet. So when we designed our space toilet, first it has to have a seat belt on it to hold you down. And then we decided to separate solids and liquids because they're easier to store that way. So we just have a tube that you pee into, and it has air pulled into the tube. So it's not a big deal. For the women, there's a cup fits up against them. For the guys, it's just like a little funnel. You just pee into this tube, and it goes into a sewage tank. But the solids that come out of your body, that's a harder problem to solve. And it's an important medical one, because on Earth, everything falls on the floor. But in space, it's going to float around. So it'll really make you sick. If you re-ingest something that came out of your body, it will really make you sick. And we can't afford to get that sick. So we designed a toilet that instead of gravity pulling everything into the toilet, it has air flow. There's air pulled down into the toilet. Sort of windy when you're sitting there, but it pulls everything out of your body. Everything that comes out of your body gets pulled down into the toilet by the air. And then in the storage tank, we just expose that to the vacuum of space. So it basically just freeze dries everything. So it kills all the bacteria so that there's no smell. And then we just store it. And then when you have a whole bunch of it stored, we put it in a little unmanned supply ship, and we undock it, and it burns up in the atmosphere. So the next time you see beautiful shooting star going across the sky. That's what it might be.
Okay, moving on. That's the comic relief for the whole thing. Anyway, working the easy sats. That's what we were working out there this morning, some of the easy sats. To work them, the equipment you need is a simple antenna. You need more than just a rubber duck, but the ones you saw out there this morning are examples of WA5VJB's cheap LEO antennas, and you saw how expensive they were.
Right here.
Yeah, here's an example of one. Made out of ground wire, welding rod, and just a piece of wood, and a diplexer wound with on a number 2 pencil and a couple of capacitors. Probably don't have probably the most expensive thing in here is that connector. So anyway, that's what this one is a dual band one, by the way. 2 elements on 2 meters and 5 elements on 70 centimeters. So one antenna does all. We have, and like I say, there's a little brochure. I've got it on this memory stick if anybody wants to look at it. And we can look at it, but it's Google WA5VJB's cheap LEO antennas and you'll get there. For FM satellites, all you need is a dual band HT. And it's desirable that it be a full duplex one, but that's not absolutely necessary. And the reason for that being full duplex is so you can hear yourself come back down and you know you're getting into the bird. You don't really know that if you can't hear yourself. The linear transponders, sideband and CW, you do have to hear yourself so you can stay tuned, because it's different rates of Doppler and Doppler on both of them and so on. We were using the full duplex sideband CW radios. I call that an FT1634, but it's really 2 FT817s. One for the uplink and one for the downlink. And we have, there's opportunities on field day. A lot of clubs work satellites for special credit on field day, and we do demos at various places. Here's some examples. This is field day 2013 out at the Lockheed Martin recreation area. There's those same 2 radios and myself up there with the computer and some cheap LEO antennas, this time on a tripod mount with rotors, so that we can take the computer, tie it to the rotors, take the computer, tie it to the radios, and get rid of a lot of the messing around. So not a lot of trouble, but it helps.
So you think if you had a radio that you could work split, you think you could work it split? So one side
yeah.
on...
Yeah, if you can do a crossband split.
Okay. Yeah.
You can do a crossband. Those FT817s will do a crossband split on the FM, one radio, and I've worked a lot of them that way. This is another deal doing pretty much what we were doing out there this morning, doing a linear demo at the Cowtown Hamfest a couple of years ago. Doug, W5BL, myself, and Douglas, KA2UPW. Here's HamCom 2013. We did demos in front of 150 Boy Scouts over at HamCom, and had a good time with that. Picture in the right of all of the boys, and you might recognize my hat up there in the middle. That's my trademark hat that I wear at Dayton and a lot of places. A Stetson with AMSAT on the front of it. Near future, that AMSAT thing we looked at earlier, there's actually 3 more of those ready to go, pretty much ready to go. One of them's in Russia still, and there's 2 others that are down in Houston that could be resurrected if we could find a good launch opportunity for them, or even parts used out of them or whatever for more satellites. So that's something ready. New features for the ISS. We now have the capability of video down out of the Columbus module, and later this year we'll be doing our first demos of that with real school kids involved. And we're also going to put some better radios up there than the old Ericssons in the Columbus module, we hope in the near future. FunCube is, again, that's AO73. It's a microsat, I mean a CubeSat, 4x4x4 inches, and we'll be talking through it after a bit. UCube is another British one that's due to launch on June the 19th, and it's a couple of other experiments, but the heart of it, the RF part of it and all, will be another FunCube, and it's what they call a 3U CubeSat. It's in other words, it's 4x4x12, so it's three of those CubeSats hooked together. And then, don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but KiwiSat is still on the drawing. Well, it's more than on the drawing board. It's pretty much ready to go down in New Zealand for a satellite, and we just don't have a launch for it yet. Don't know when it's going to go. We're leaning heavily on STEM education to help fund what few launches we do get nowadays. Schools can get money for that, and NASA even runs competitions that we can get involved in. Project Fox is an example of that. That's AMSAT's CubeSat, and we've got two of them pretty well defined now, Fox 1 and Fox 2, and the AO51 replacement of Fox 1, and Fox 2 will be some new mode development. But we have won two of the NASA Project Ilana launch collaborations, and we've got one of those launches is defined, and it's now scheduled. It was scheduled for late this year, but they recently slipped that launch to the middle of 2015. So it gives, one way of looking at that, it gives us more time to build and check out the satellite, but on the other hand, we don't get it up in orbit for another year. But at least we get it up there free, and we've got another one of those on the back burner that we've won, but no defined launch for it yet. Again, there's more status available on these on the web. Ilana is NASA's educational launch of nanosats, and you write proposals and enter a competition and win the opportunities for free launches. Here's that's the prototype of Fox 1, standing there with Tony, AA2TX. That's a little bit of I took this picture not this year but last year at Dayton, and Tony has passed away from cancer here just a couple months ago. AA2TX, 55 years old, and we've got a new director of engineering for AMSAT now, and that's our president Barry with another model of Fox 1 there in the booth. Those are full-size models of those satellites. Give you an idea how big they are.
Are there antennas on?
Huh?
Antennas, where are the antennas?
Antennas, they don't have the antennas on them right there, but they're just, dipole, not dipole, but wire antennas.
Now, the FunCube that we talked to a little later, it's the same size as that?
Same size as that, yeah. Looks almost identical. And summary, support satellite activity, volunteer. AMSAT and ARIS both need you. Help get the next satellites in schools to support education. Contribute when you can, both dollars and time, and help bring forth a new generation of people with expanded knowledge of science, space, and technology. If we don't, who will be interested in and be members of the scientific community in 20 years? And that's a real, very real problem these days. And finally, contact information. This is me at the top, and then the AMSAT webpage is a good source. ARIS is not so much anymore since that's down, but the page is still there. You all know about the ARRL. ARISAT, ARIS is okay. ARISAT is the one that's down. It's not being updated much. But ARIS is okay. There's some slow scan TV that's been archived on that other one, on the SSTV one. And then there's telemetry data available also. So those are some of the things that are handy. Again, you can see the video reports on the NASA on the AMSAT webpage, and right now, right at this moment, on the AMSAT webpage, there's several links that you just click on for video from the Dayton Ham Convention last week out in the satellite demo area. That's pretty much it. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, right up.
Yeah, Chief, I was wondering, how are the geomagnetic storms off the sun affecting the satellites? Is there a...
They can, but we don't know of a case where that has been a problem. Yeah, but that can happen.
Okay.
We recently, don't know exactly what happened, but there was a recent one called KickSat that was launched by the SpaceX deal, and KickSat was put out, and it had a whole bunch of little bitty, I mean real little satellites in it called sprites, and it was going to furthermore kick those out. And the parent satellite, KickSat, came out and everything was fine, but they had it by agreement. They had a 16-day timer, and they didn't want it to kick anything out for 16 days until it drifted away from the ISS, basically. And so they had a timer on it, and it was in a very low altitude orbit, I mean even lower than the space station, so it wasn't going to last very long anyway. Well, something happened, radiation from the South Atlantic anomaly or space or whatever, we don't know, but the timer reset in that KickSat thing. And the 16-day timer started over several days into its cycle. So that made it a 20 or 25-day timer or whatever. And lo and behold, it re-entered before that timer ran out, and it's gone now. So things happen.
The world situation with
Yeah.
Russia, does that look like it's going to be a problem with launches, anything that's related to Russia? Since you don't,
No, we're still on pretty good terms with the Russians as far as cooperative space things. We both are them and us are the primary folks on the space station, and we do a lot of our training in Russia. They do some of their training over here, and we're still on friendly terms, although it gets a little touchy from time to time. But
not quite to the trampoline method of launch.
yeah. Anyway.
So does AMSAT, do they talk to the SpaceX people at all?
Oh yeah. We're not proud. We'll take anywhere we can get an affordable launch, but you know they're deeply involved in everything. They haven't had any purely experimental launches. They try to do something with their first one. As a matter of fact, I won't say they don't do anything, because that KickSat thing we just talked about was launched by SpaceX before it rendezvoused with the space station. So it was at a lower altitude even than the space station, and it went from there. So there were a number of small satellites kicked out of it before it rendezvoused. So they do cooperate, but we're not too interested in, at least with our Fox satellites, we want them up in an orbit that'll stay there for 10 years. And even the space station is such a low altitude orbit that if we didn't reboost it periodically, it would burn up and re-enter. On the other hand, you take A07, launched in 1974, it's high enough that it's safe from now on. Unless it runs into something, it'll always be there. Okay, anything else? Well, thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
And let's see, I've got a
we need to do?
Just a second.
But you look like a Bond girl.
Yes, I do often. Like Craig said, I make this good. That is pretty scary.
Okay, it's almost straight overhead, slightly to the east of it.
W5HRC repeater.
That is 200 kilowatt peak. Now listen to that Doppler.
Yeah.
We're at peak elevation, so
And this is HO68.
come on, brother. It's making. That's Doppler. This thing goes from 9 kcs high to 9 kcs low in the pass. And we're at about 0 Doppler right now, but max rate of change of Doppler. So it's changing very rapidly between dips and dogs.
And this is HO68.
HO68. So you want to, there's where it is right now. We're right over.
How you doing? Listening to some satellites. Checking out some satellites.
Yes, I gathered that. How you doing?
Alright. This is Chinese satellite, HO68. It has gaps in there and it drifts quite a bit during the gap. Now, get a feel while you're there. Rotate it if you can and see if you notice. And see where the pointing is best. It's kind of hard to get drifting so bad. It's going southeast now of 158 and 62 degrees. Now I'll tell you what, somebody grab that other antenna down there. We'll get started over here.
Move that right, you can play music back.
Now then, you got the feel for it, so see what the difference is. Probably find places in polarization you can null it out. And it's harder to do with that circular, which is good.
Yeah, you don't have to be as precise with that.
Ought to be down at 45 degrees now, and in the south, almost south. Almost south.
What you do then?
Now get down there and rotate. You're probably not right on it either. Straight line west of it.
Well, it seems to want a horizontal polarization.
It varies. A lot of that has to do with surroundings.
Right.
Anybody else wants to try the feel of that, go right ahead. South, 35 degrees getting pretty, it's 2,000 kilometers away from us now.
So it's moving away
Yeah,
from.
yeah. Pretty rapidly. Go up in elevation just a little bit more, and a little bit more to the left to your right.
Yeah, so it's getting stronger. You move your ride a little bit more sound.
Now, when we hear it again, push it. You don't have to have, just tip it up. You don't have to get your whole hand up. Yeah.
Yeah, up and down like the end.
Turn your polarization down front.
Now it's largely vertical.
Now it's vertical.
You have to keep adjusting all three of those to maximize everything. And that other antenna, like I say, it's got the same amount of gain, the same number of elements per side, but it's Thanks, I've enjoyed it. Thank you. And we're 2,500 kilometers away now.
Now he's sending